This is Metal Magnitude, covering classic and modern hard rock and metal. Chelsea here on the phone with him from Sermon. Thank you for joining me today.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Thank you. So first off, congrats on the release of your new album of Golden Verse that just came out last week on Prosthetic Records. So I'd like to start off from the beginning of how this record came together and also following up on your debut, Birth of the Marvelous.
I think, I guess the beginning of it was, I always write, I've always written music, but now I'm sort of contractually obligated in a way, which sounds really bad. It makes it sound like a corporate job, but I do like writing music, so it is a natural part of my habits and my brain. So it's very reflective of my mood, and I think this album's a little bit angrier. I'm not a very angry person in my everyday life, but there was a kind of simmering beneath anger just because of a few things in like personal life and stuff. So yeah, that's informed what this album is.
Well, that's a lot of what music is for, though, kind of having an outlet of, don't consider yourself an angry person in daily life, but, there might be something, like you said, simmering below the surface, and music is the perfect channel to kind of let that out, especially metal.
Yeah, you're right. And it's actually, in a way, it's sort of relieving. It's like letting the steam out because it's not good to be, I'm consciously not angry, but it's still we're all sort of suffer from frustration, I think. And doing stuff like this, whether it's painting or making music, it's helpful, I think.
Definitely any kind of creative outlet that you can let it out. And then, in some cases, the creative outlet may also be the source of frustration too, sometimes if you feel like you're not expressing
Yeah.
your ideas fully. So for this album, do you feel like you kind of got out all the ideas and the emotion that you were trying to express?
Yes, in a way. But it's never really finished. You just got to kind of be okay with what you've got in a sense. Like I listen to some of the songs now, and I think, is that completed? I can't quite tell, but I think it's just much more fruitful to be okay with it not maybe being completely right and just moving on from it. So in some ways, I did get what I needed to get out, but at the same time, it's also probably not quite finished. But then that means it's something to write next time.
Exactly. There you go. That fuels the new music as well. So something else I'd like to
Exactly.
start on is the single
Mm.
Golden, because that is not the first track, but it was the first single we heard off the album. So what about that song made it right to be the first impression of this new album?
I think it's the one that I thought this is probably the kind of best of sermon in a way. It's it's got a big chorus, but the song doesn't work as a verse, chorus, bridge, verse, chorus type thing. It's a constant crescendo that builds and builds and builds until it climaxes at the end. And so it just, for me, it represents what I like doing, making a something kind of listenable, but also in a way that maybe you shouldn't do that. So it's not like a pop song, but it probably could be if you change the order of things and maybe some of the instruments.
You did mention, I believe, for the song Departure, that, not only is that appropriate word to end an album, but you've said that you were aiming to combine blast beats with an almost pop friendly sort of vibe. Now, a lot of the metal world is comfortable with melodic and different sounds these days. And as much as I love classic traditional metal too, I also like that there's room for a lot of different sides and sounds to metal these days. So what are your thoughts on that?
I personally I don't really listen to metal that much anymore. It was a big part of my upbringing in a way when I was a teenager. But now and not that I don't like it, just my brain goes to other things. And actually, most of the songs on this new album don't come from metal at all. It's more come from like other pop music or like post-punk type music or and then I've just turned the distortion up, essentially. I've taken kind of borrowed ideas from lots of other different places and put it in a new way so that it doesn't really sound anything like the original. Like Departure you mentioned, embarrassingly, that lead came from me jamming over Hero by Nickelback. So which,
You know what?
not my
Inspiration is
favorite
inspiration.
band. Yeah, I think it's just what you do with it. It's you can only cook with sort of what ingredients you're given, and I think you've just got to kind of seek out new ingredients or ones you'd never try to use. If you want something to sound maybe different, I think that's probably the way to go about it.
Definitely. And now that you mentioned post-punk, that clicked for me. All of a
Mm.
sudden I noticed that influence in there too, because your music definitely doesn't fit into one genre, which is great. It seems like the progressive metal world is also really embracing Sermon right now. You don't define the band as, prog in any kind of way, but it seems to be resonating in that direction a bit. So was there kind of any sense of genre going into this album or Sermon in general?
No. And actually I can see people getting frustrated with how I guess the press kit is sent out and it says for fans of Tool or it's progressive metal or whatever they've done. And you can see all these reviewers being like, oh, I mean, this doesn't really sound like Tool at all. I mean, there's some Tom heavy sections. And there's definitely some little bits of spice of Tool thrown in, I guess. But I don't think it really does. It's much more heavy metal, I would say. And I don't even really think it's prog. I love prog. I love old school prog, but it's not the structures are just they're not proggy enough, I don't think. They're quite basic songwriting structures, and I think that would frustrate people going into it expecting a prog album. At the same time though, I do use mellotrons, and that is just something that King Crimson and Camel and Genesis, they just absolutely sway their music in. So I can see the relationship, but I've never tried to make, even the first album, I didn't try to make it prog. It was just sort of cast upon me in a way.
Passed upon you. That's funny.
Yeah, yeah.
No, that's cool though. I mean, because to be able to have that multi-genre sense that doesn't fit into a package, it opens it up to more listeners in that sense. People who do like the prog stuff, like maybe that element of it. People who are looking for more of a melodic doom sense, they're getting that out of it too. And people who even can appreciate a pop song structure, like you're saying, that's in there too. So I do like the way that you kind of blend a little bit of everything from your own influences into Sermon.
Yeah, honestly, I'm not really aiming for any genre. I do like metal because I quite like the energy of it, but I'm just trying to make something I think I haven't heard or that I want to hear in a different way. That's really all I'm doing. Even when it comes down to just the word, I want someone to, I wanted someone to sing golden in the way that I did on this record, and that was the whole purpose of it, really.
Great results too. And I'd like to ask
Thank
a
you.
little bit more about your background as a musician as well, because you write all the songs yourself before getting anyone else involved. So do you play the multiple instruments yourself when writing, or what's your method like?
Yeah, I'm not a great musician, but I've grown up playing guitar, but I can tinker with things like and make it sound like I know what I'm doing. And that's how I kind of go about it. But it does make like the recording process a bit more arduous because I'm not a session player. Like I don't sit there shredding on the guitar and practicing sweep picking. It just doesn't interest me at all. But I do think I'm quite good at making songs. It's the thing, quite good at having like the vision for what it's going to be. But I mean, I suppose that depends if whether the listener thinks it's any good. But I'd say that's probably my main skill. But in terms of being a musician, I'm not one. I don't think I've picked up the guitar for about 6 months now, which I probably need to change because I'm gonna have to write a new one. So
Exactly. So you kind of only pick it up when you have a specific idea or inspiration and you need to get the song writing out, basically.
yes, in a way, I kind of have to give myself. I haven't got the framework for a new album yet, and I think I had that last time. I kind of knew what I wanted to do, and I think this one I don't know. I don't know how to step next, so I'm sort of putting it off. But all it takes is, I mean, the only reason I wrote this is because I saw a book that was called the Oxford Book of Modern Verse. So I took the title and turned it to Of Golden Verse, and it gave me a framework because it's just a collection of poems from a lot of famous writers, and it's all just about observations in society at the time. And that was I was like, well, there we go. That's an idea for the new record. So
That's
that's what
really
we have now.
cool. Yeah, I mean,
Mm.
inspiration can really come from anywhere. And that's the other thing about not necessarily having next album in mind yet. That's fine. You just released this one, and you never want to try to force yourself onto the next album either. The inspiration can come naturally whenever it does. But also to ask more on the band of
Mm.
Sermon and your team really for
Yeah.
this album. You had James Stewart, who has been
Yes.
in Vader, Decapitated, and you also had Scott Atkins producing. So how do you feel
Yes.
they help expand on your songwriting and ideas to bring them more to life?
So I create a demo version of the album it's pretty tangible. It almost sounds like an album, but it's done with shit equipment and pretty poor playing because I'm just jamming along to like a drum beat or something. So I'll write it all and I'll give James the demo, and then he'll be like, and then when we get to the studio, he will basically turn it into something like better or actually playable or more human. It completely transforms the drum parts, I would say. But he does like having a guide, if he doesn't mind me saying. He does like having an idea of what I'm thinking, which is fair enough. And Scott Atkins, he is he's like the binding, he's like the he takes the ideas and actually makes them kind of listenable. He doesn't do a lot of like song changing, but we did add a part that he thought needed it on the distance, and it was definitely a better song for it. So I'm always willing to listen, and I actually really like having a kind of creative partnership, even though I'm like a one-man band. I do like listening to people, and I do think good ideas can come from everyone.
Absolutely. And especially since you're doing it in a non-traditional kind of setting, it's not the old school band way of writing songs of like just jamming together and seeing what comes out. It's like you're kind of doing it in stages of you having that base level song structure and perhaps lyrics and melodies already in there, and then just bringing that in to be kind of further worked on and built up with the rest of your team.
But no, I would like to. I actually would like to do that as a band, just to see what it would be like. But I don't. It's just I don't have a band, and everyone else is busy, so it's not really practical. But I would like to do it. I think it would yield interesting results.
Definitely. I
Um,
mean, you guys are definitely
yeah,
yielding great results right now. Like I said, the Of Golden Verse record is amazing. The first time I heard it, I was like, absolutely, I want to interview this band because this
thank.
sounds fantastic. But no, I agree. I mean, there's different
That's really
approaches.
nice.
Thank you.
Thank you. No, honestly, it's really lovely that people even say something like that. No, I genuinely appreciate it. Thank you.
Of course, no, genuinely, it's a really good album. But that's the thing is, Sermon as a band, is still fairly new. This is your guys' second album, so I feel like we can definitely look forward to seeing more different directions that you'll take, whether you stick with this kind of personal songwriting level or whether you expand into a band. I think Sermon has a lot of potential
Mm.
for expanding in different directions.
I think it's got one of the hardest things about it is I think it hasn't got a tight brief, so it can go anywhere really, and I think that's what I'm struggling with. But at the same time, that's its greatest strength, I think, as well. It's just trying to sort of pull in the sandbox so that you can actually make something that makes sense to people.
I feel like that's something that bands these days, especially newer up and coming bands, tend to find a little bit of a challenge in, because with social media and everything, and I'm not going to go on the whole social media is good or bad debate. It has a lot of good points, but at the same time, there's a lot of bands out there, and people tend to get saturation in a lot of different directions, so it can be a little tricky for bands to kind of find their spot where they're like, okay, this is what I do and this is what I have a whole fan base for. But at the same time, that does come, because you have the convenience
Yeah.
of being able to get it out there for everybody. It's kind of like that classic cliche phrase, like "build it and they will come" or something like that. It's
Well, see,
you
that's what
put it
I
out
thought,
there.
but it does take time. Like I certainly with when the singles were being released to this album, I did not many people. It wasn't going outside of its existing audience really, and it's really difficult, I think, as well if you don't play live to get a following, because I think people just won't. There's not much to sort of record and encourage people to listen beyond the actual album itself. And I think we live in a content-driven world now where everyone's just sucking in loads of different things like constantly, and I think it limits us somewhat. But I mean, since the album's come out a few days ago, it's certainly been taking off a lot quicker.
Like you said about it taking time, but you are already on your second album. So now you're giving, the world more of a taste of Sermon and just kind of expanding further. So part of being a musician is having the patience for it, I think.
God, yeah, tell me about, yeah, definitely.
So, seeing as you did write the songs yourself before bringing others in on the team, what did you find, or did you find any track very challenging to bring from your idea to the actual final product we hear now?
Yeah, two songs on there. Like the Witch, I couldn't get the chorus to sound like a chorus for a long time. There just was something missing, like there wasn't enough contrast between the sections, and in the end it was the vocals that was doing it and the drum beat. And I had to go back into the studio and re-record some parts to get it to a place where it sounded more like I had more impact. And then the other one was Senescence, because it's a softer song, and it's the one I think maybe doesn't feel complete, although it does seem a lot of people seem to like it. I think the ending just is maybe, for me, I think it's missing something. It could have been like a solo or a guitar lead, or I don't know. It just doesn't, it needed more at the end, maybe. But I'm still happy with it. But yeah, it's a challenging song because unlike the rest of the album, which is pretty hard hitting, Senescence is kind of a little bit more tender.
But that's also good to have that kind of changing tone within an album. I mean, that's part of an album experience is, kind of reaching different levels, different emotions. But kind of like we were saying earlier, as a musician, you're truly never going to feel as truly done, probably. Like you're always going to find little bits and pieces that you're like, I could have done that a little differently. But once you have an album structure in place and it's out there, it's like, all right, you have to be happy with what you got. And if you feel unsatisfied with any bit of it, just do a little differently next time,
Exactly. Yeah. And you've got to be at peace with that. You've got to find the measure where perfection is pretty unattainable. And some people just can't let go. And I think it really stops their potential. You've just got to be okay with fucking it up, honestly. And I am. But also I'm aware that it needs to be good. And so I have to have this scale in my head of like, okay, yeah, this is good, even if it's not perfect. I try not to be obsessed, because otherwise it will just stop progress,
right.
I think.
No, that is important to kind of rein in your own creative control in that sense and tell yourself, okay,
Yeah.
time to stop with this specific track. So on that kind of flip side, was there any track that you felt just flowed super easily from start to finish that just came out to be just what you envisioned?
Yeah, I'd say Golden and Departure were pretty quick to write. I just knew how it just made so much sense. Every part, I knew exactly where it was going to go. Yeah, they were definitely and actually they've got some of I think they're kind of the most energetic, maybe.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So yeah, I think, yeah.
No, that's good. Well, I mean, that's also why Golden, I'm sure part of the reason why Golden ended up being the first single and first impression, because it was something that just kind of flowed for you there and flowed into, giving us all the first taste of the new Sermon record.
Yeah, although I have to say, I write things chronologically. So the album is written, it's song by song. And then I got to that end. And the other thing is I think when I'm writing an album, I know that I've done a heavy song here, and it's kind of winding down in the middle to a softer song, and then I climb it back up. And I know by that point that the last two songs have to be super intense, and they almost have to be the best songs, because you need people to get there, and it needs to have a payoff, I think.
Like the grand finale of the album, yeah.
Exactly. And it will work that way as a live show. You'll come away from that. If we played Departure first, it would give impact, but then it's like, where does it go from there? How do you make people feel more than that? And I think if you end on Departure, you pretty much can't make people feel any more, because it's just so intense.
Yeah, I mean, of course, that comes down to just structuring the set lists and figuring out what you feel would vibe the best in a live setting. I do also want to
Yeah.
ask about your signing to Prosthetic Records too, and on how that
Mm.
connection came about.
So I self-funded the first album because I just wanted to do it, and I put myself into a bit of debt, and it was finished. And then I basically sat there, looked at all the metal record labels, and like found their A&R guys. I put together like a little PDF, made it look kind of real and convincing enough, and just said, "Here's a link. Do you want to basically buy it off me?" And then yeah, everyone got back. Some labels were like, "We can't really see how it's going to be pulled off live," which is fair enough because there wasn't a band. And then it was a little bit of a sort of a bidding war between a couple. But what I liked about Prosthetic is that Steve, Joe, and EJ, they liked it and they were listening to it, and and I just felt like I would have people who cared enough to do their best to honor it as a release. So that's kind of the reason why I went with them.
And that is important to feel that kind of connection, and that, the label or whoever is going to be involved with helping you get your music out there, helping you promote it, actually can sit down and listen to it, comprehend it, feel it, and understand it. That's an important thing to look for. So good decision making in that case.
Yeah, yeah.
So for someone who's discovering Sermon for the first time, what would you want them to take away from listening to your albums? Whether it's just a sort of, musical feeling or lyrical message or anything that you feel you want to get out there through this band.
I think I know people who, people who listen to metal will probably listen to this most likely, and they would have heard a few of the things that are in there before somewhere, I would imagine. I would quite like to be able to give it to someone who maybe didn't like metal, and they'd be able to see, okay, I can hear beyond the noise, I can hear the melody. I can hear, my dream would be to get someone who has never heard a blast beat and who'd be like, their ears would bleed at the thought of it, to sort of embrace it. I think that's what I'm trying to do, which I'm not trying to be like Linkin Park or anything. I think there's a load of music out there that's really extreme. And one of the hardest things is to listen beyond the noise of it. So say like the early Emperor albums, for example, if you can get past the noise, the melodies there are just so rich and it's really epic. And I get why like people couldn't digest it, but I think if you could see beyond the noise, there's something to appreciate there. And I think that's what I would like with Sermon.
That's very cool. I mean, that ties right back to what we were discussing about not really having limits in terms of genre. And in that sense, you can reach out to other genres as well and be like, hey, got some cool stuff over here. Let's pull you a little bit more in this direction, introduce you to something new and different.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the key to the next phase is probably finding a new like musical vocabulary in a way. That sounds really pompous, but like, using some different instruments, thinking about, could we add horns maybe, and how do we just do it so that it's not like, say, Dimmu Borgir and just put an orchestra in there that's really well written, and then just some chuggy guitars underneath to make it a bit metal. I think, what if there's a bit more of a relationship between all the instruments, maybe? I think that's probably the way in which we could turn next. It's just actually being able to pull it off that's an absolute nightmare. So
right. Well, it's the experimentation, but like you said, also just kind of the fundamentals of getting a band together so you can get all set up to play live. So do you have some ideas of what's on the horizon for Sermon right now?
We basically need a realistic offer. I think we can, doing a tour, because most of the time tours will happen and you buy onto a bus, which, if you're a mid kind of tier, sort of like, say like a band like Leprous, for example, that you would buy onto the bus, then it would cost you like 15,000 euros. And we just don't have 15,000 euros to do that. So I think the most realistic thing is to look at festivals who will pay you to do a set, and we can just get there and do it, and we'll do a one-off or do a London show, and then just hope we can sort of prove that we can deliver live so that people will give us more realistic offers, I think. It sounds really businessy and corporate-y, but
That's a side of the music world though that a lot of people don't think about. It's there. That's part of it.
it is. And I'm just one, unlike other, like say a band, just one guy's got a van, everyone puts in like £200 and suddenly you can go away, for a week or two, just going up and down the country. That's just not an option for me, unfortunately. So we're limited somewhat, but I'm very keen to do it, and I know everyone else is as well. So hopefully we can get something somewhere.
I'm sure you guys will. I mean, like I said, what you have there, the fundamentals of your music, that is the most important part. The album, what everybody is hearing, what is reaching everybody is really good. So I think it's just a matter of you guys kind of taking it in steps and stages, introducing Sermon to the world one step at a time, and I think you'll get there.
That's it. And that's just the fighting the good fight. So,
well, it's been awesome getting to know more about you and everything behind Sermon. Like I said, it's an awesome record of Golden Verse out now on Prosthetic Records. Everyone should definitely check it out. Give Sermon some support. And we're looking forward to seeing some more from you guys.
Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.